My wife forgot our anniversary, so I forgot to pick her up from the airport. My wife forgot our anniversary, so I decided to forget to pick her up from the airport. Let me lay it all out here, just to get it off my chest. I am a 23-year-old man, married to Sarah, who is 25. We've been together for 5 years now, 5 long years. And honestly, I'm starting to wonder if I'm the only one holding things together. I know relationships have their ups and downs, but this feels like I'm stuck on a one-way street, driving alone while she's cruising in the opposite direction without a care in the world. So, here's the deal. It was our 5th wedding anniversary. A pretty big milestone, right? You'd think it would warrant some kind of acknowledgement. Even a simple happy anniversary would have done the trick. But no, nothing. I had been dropping hints for weeks, subtly trying to get her attention. I'd casually say things like, "Wow, I can't believe we've been married for 5 years." Or, "Do you think we'll do something special this year for our anniversary?" She'd nod, maybe mutter something under her breath about being busy, and then move on like I hadn't said a word. I brushed it off at first. She's been stressed with work, I told myself. Maybe she's planning some surprise and doesn't want to give it away. Well, the day came, and let me tell you, it felt like any other Tuesday. She didn't say a single word about it. No happy anniversary, no I love you, no flowers, no plans, absolutely nothing. It was like the day didn't exist for her. I mean, I've gone all out every single year. I've planned elaborate surprise dinners, written heartfelt letters, and picked out thoughtful gifts to make each anniversary special. And yet, here I was, sitting alone, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. At some point, I couldn't take it anymore. I brought it up. I said something like, "So I guess we're not celebrating today?" She just laughed it off. Laughed. She said, "Oh, we'll do something later, don't worry." But later never came. The day ended, just like that, without her even acknowledging it. I was hurt, deeply. I felt like all my efforts, all my love had been tossed aside like an afterthought. It wasn't the first time either. The past few anniversaries had felt like I was the only one trying, the only one who cared. To make things worse, she had a business trip that same week. She flew out on the 14th, the day after our anniversary, and was supposed to return the next evening. As usual, she asked me to pick her up from the airport. And you know what? I almost did. I almost brushed everything under the rug, like I always do, and played the role of the dutiful husband. But this time, something in me snapped. She had spent the whole trip texting me about how exhausted she was, how much she couldn't wait to get home. Not once did she mention the anniversary or acknowledge my feelings. It was all about her, as usual. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I decided I was done. I wasn't going to pick her up, let her figure it out. Maybe then she'd realize how much she's been taking me for granted. When she sent me her flight details, time, gate, all that, I didn't respond. I didn't even open the message. For once, I decided to focus on myself. I spent the day doing things I enjoy, things I hadn't done in ages because I was always too busy trying to make her happy. I went out for a long drive, grabbed dinner at my favorite place, and just tried to feel like myself again. Around 8 p.m., the calls started. First, a text. "Hey, where are you?" Then another. "Hello? My flight landed." And then the phone calls, one after another. I ignored every single one. I won't lie. Part of me felt guilty, but another part of me felt free, like I was finally standing up for myself after years of being overlooked. After about an hour of relentless calls, I sent her a single text. "Oh, sorry, totally forgot you needed a ride. Happens sometimes." Yes, it was petty, I know that. But it felt like the only way to get through to her. Predictably, she was furious. She bombarded me with angry messages, calling me childish and irresponsible. She accused me of overreacting, of blowing things out of proportion. But I didn't care. For once, I didn't care. She eventually made it home somehow, probably called an Uber or something. When she walked through the door, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She barely looked at me. I didn't say a word, I just went to bed and let her stew in her anger. The next day, it was the same story. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened. She gave me some tired excuse about work being stressful, about how she had lost track of time, but I wasn't buying it. I didn't want excuses. I wanted her to see what she had done, to admit that she had hurt me. But as the days went by, it became clear that nothing was going to change. Now, here I am, writing this, feeling a strange mix of guilt and satisfaction. I don't know where we go from here, but one thing is certain. I can't keep doing this. Something has to change, or I'm not sure how much longer I can hold on.
Update 1.
Here's what went down. After I sent Sarah that message about forgetting to pick her up, the silence was deafening for a while. No texts, no calls, nothing. I figured she was stewing, which honestly I wasn't mad about. I kept my phone on silent and let the hours drag by, feeling this weird mix of guilt and stubbornness. She had ignored me for so long. Why should I rush to clean up the mess this time? It wasn't until close to 10 p.m. that I finally caved and checked my phone. And wow, she had gone full meltdown mode. 15 missed calls, 20 plus texts. Most of them were a chaotic blend of accusations and anger, calling me petty, irresponsible, childish, you name it. But the one that hit differently was, "You really had to leave me stranded? This is how you treat me after everything I've done for you?" Classic guilt trip. I wasn't about to let her spin this around on me, though. So I shot back a single reply. "Maybe now you know what it feels like to be forgotten." That was it. Nothing more. I knew that dragging it out would be pointless. Her response was textbook. "Sarah, I'm sorry, okay, but I've been busy with work. I didn't mean to forget the anniversary. You know how stressful things have been lately." Same excuse, different day. Work stress. As if that was supposed to magically erase the fact that she forgot something important. Again. I didn't reply. I let her words hang in the void, and eventually, she stopped trying for the night. The next morning, I got the full story. Turns out she had been sitting at the airport for over 3 hours, waiting. She tried calling me every half hour before finally giving up and calling a cab. And because she didn't want to waste money, she waited until the last possible minute to do it. By the time she got home, it was after midnight. She walked in, dropped her suitcase on the floor without a word, and brushed past me like I wasn't even there. The tension in the room was unbearable. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She just launched into this passive-aggressive monologue about how unfair I was being. "I've been working hard, and this is how you treat me?" Like her job was some magical get-out-of-jail-free card. The first night was rough. She barely looked at me except when I was getting ready for bed. I could feel her eyes on me, but I wasn't about to make the first move. She had to figure this out on her own. The next day, she tried smoothing things over via text. "I've been working so much lately, it just slipped my mind. You know how it is." But I didn't respond. I wasn't about to let her keep dodging the bigger issue. The silence between us stretched for days. Every conversation we had felt like we were walking on eggshells. She was passive-aggressive, throwing little jabs here and there, but I stood my ground. Then her dad got involved. He called me, clearly upset. "I can't believe you left her there. She's been working so hard and you just let her figure it out on her own." It wasn't concern. It was a guilt trip disguised as one. I didn't argue. I just let the call end and walked away. That evening, Sarah made another attempt at apologizing, but it was hollow. "I guess I could have done better, but you didn't have to leave me stranded," she said, as if her half apology absolved her of everything. I wasn't buying it. I told her straight up, "I'll move past this if you actually acknowledge what I'm feeling and start being more considerate. It's not just about the anniversary. It's about how you treat me in general." Her response? She accused me of overreacting. She said I was blowing everything out of proportion. At that point, it was clear she didn't get it. After a few more days of tension, I decided I needed to focus on myself. I picked up my old hobbies and stopped catering to her moods. It was freeing, honestly. Sarah didn't love it, though. As a last-ditch effort, she booked a dinner reservation for us. She said it was to make up for things, but I couldn't tell if it was a genuine attempt or just another temporary band-aid. So here I am, still waiting to see if she's really going to change, or if this is just another cycle destined to repeat itself.
Update 2.
Sarah decided she wanted to make things right. She sent me a text, casually mentioning that she had made a dinner reservation for us at some restaurant. Her exact words were, "Let's have dinner and start fresh." I remember staring at my phone, unsure of how to feel. On one hand, I wanted to believe this was a genuine attempt to fix things. On the other hand, I had been let down so many times before that optimism felt like a dangerous gamble. Still, I figured I owed it to myself to see this through, even if my expectations were already scraping the floor. The day of the dinner, Sarah texted me again around noon to confirm the reservation was for 7 p.m. It felt strangely transactional, like she was scheduling a meeting rather than trying to repair our relationship. I couldn't muster any excitement. Instead, I found myself going through the motions, getting dressed, and convincing myself to give it one more chance. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. When I arrived at the restaurant, my heart sank. It wasn't the cozy, intimate spot I had imagined. No warm ambiance, no quiet corners for meaningful conversations, nothing like that. Instead, it was a generic chain restaurant, the kind where people go when they want something fast and easy. The kind I had openly told Sarah I wasn't a fan of. Yet here we were. It felt like a slap in the face, honestly. I tried to shrug it off, but the lack of effort was glaring. As soon as we sat down, Sarah launched into a monologue about work. Deadlines, meetings, her stressful boss. It was like she had pressed play on a recording of her complaints. I waited for her to pause, to even acknowledge what we were really here for, but she didn't. She didn't bring up the airport. She didn't bring up our anniversary. She didn't bring up the fact that her actions had made me feel invisible and unimportant. Instead, she just kept going on about herself. I tried to participate in the conversation, but my responses felt hollow. Deep down, I wasn't mad about the restaurant, the airport, or even the anniversary anymore. It was about the bigger picture, the pattern, the way Sarah always seemed to choose the path of least resistance, never once stopping to think about what I might want or need. Eventually, the conversation shifted to the food. I made a passing comment about how it wasn't really my thing, and that's when everything started to unravel. Sarah immediately got defensive, accusing me of being ungrateful. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the food, but she wasn't hearing me, and that's when the floodgates opened. I told her everything. How I felt like a background character in my own relationship. How it wasn't just about the forgotten anniversaries or the casual neglect. It was about years of feeling like I was the only one trying. I laid it all out there, raw and unfiltered, hoping that maybe this time she'd finally understand. But instead of listening, Sarah deflected. She hit me with the same tired excuse she always used. Nobody's perfect. She said I should appreciate the effort she was putting in, as if the bare minimum was something to celebrate. When the waiter came by to check on us, I barely noticed. Sarah handed me a small box of chocolates with a forced smile. "Here," she said. "Sorry about everything." It was such a hollow gesture, a last-ditch attempt to patch things up without actually addressing the real issues. The rest of the dinner was painfully quiet. The ride home wasn't much better. Sarah was clearly annoyed, but I couldn't tell if she was upset with me for calling her out or with herself for not knowing how to fix it. Either way, the silence was deafening. In the days that followed, Sarah started doing small chores around the house, washing dishes, folding laundry, tidying up. At first, I thought it might be a step in the right direction, but it didn't feel genuine. It felt like damage control. She wasn't doing these things because she cared. She was doing them because she wanted to avoid another confrontation. I found myself pulling away emotionally. I didn't want to keep setting myself up for disappointment. A friend suggested I give Sarah an ultimatum. Either she put in the effort or I walk away. It seemed harsh, but the idea stuck with me. I couldn't keep living in this cycle of hoping for change that never came. As more days passed, it became clear to me that Sarah didn't truly understand the depth of the problem. She thought small gestures and surface-level efforts would be enough to fix everything. But they weren't. They never were. I started thinking about our future, about whether this relationship was even worth saving. And honestly, I didn't know anymore. Update 3. Weeks of dealing with the same exhausting cycle, empty apologies, half-hearted attempts at change, and endless excuses, I hit my breaking point. I realized I couldn't do this anymore. I had tried everything. Being patient, giving Sarah chance after chance, hoping she'd finally see the light. But it was painfully clear. She didn't get it. Or maybe she didn't want to. Either way, I knew I had to confront her, even though the thought made my stomach churn. That night, when she came home from work, I told her we needed to talk. Not later, not tomorrow, right then and there. We sat in the living room, the tension already thick in the air. She looked tired, sure, but this wasn't something I could keep putting off. "Sarah," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't do this anymore. This relationship has been one-sided for too long. You've ignored me, forgotten important moments, and you never take responsibility for any of it." She blinked at me, clearly caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone defensive. "I've been working so hard, and you're acting like I don't do." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "It's not about your work, Sarah. It's about how you've treated me. The anniversary, the airport. I've tried to make this work for both of us, but you haven't even tried to meet me halfway." Her expression shifted into familiar territory. Defensive, dismissive. "You're blowing things out of proportion," she snapped, her voice rising. "You act like I forgot our anniversary on purpose. I didn't mean to forget, okay? I've been stressed out with work." I shook my head. "It's not just the anniversary. It's everything, Sarah. It's every time you make me feel like I don't matter. It's every birthday, every holiday where I'm the only one putting in the effort. I'm not asking for grand gestures. I'm asking for basic consideration. I'm asking for respect. I'm asking for you to care about this relationship the way I do. But you don't. And that's what hurts the most." Her face hardened. "So what are you saying? That I'm some kind of monster? That I don't care about you at all?" "That's not what I'm saying," I replied, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "I'm saying your actions don't show it. If the roles were reversed, if I forgot our anniversary or left you stranded at the airport, how would you feel?" For the first time, she didn't have a quick retort. She opened her mouth, then closed it as if she was actually thinking about it. Finally, she muttered, "I don't know. I guess I'd be pissed." "Exactly," I said. "That's how I feel. That's how I've felt for a long time." The silence between us was deafening. I could see her shifting uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding eye contact. I pressed on. "Look, I'm not here to point fingers. I want us to fix this. But I can't do it alone. I can't keep carrying this relationship by myself. We need to rebuild what we had, and that means both of us putting in the effort." She hesitated, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "Okay, I'll try, but I don't know if date nights or whatever are going to fix everything." Her tone was flat, almost dismissive, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. "It's not about date nights, Sarah," I said. "It's about showing you care. It's about trying." She nodded, but it felt obligatory, like she was just saying what I wanted to hear. The conversation ended on a tense, unresolved note. We went to bed without saying much else, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't stop wondering, were her words genuine, or was this just another attempt to placate me? I decided to give it time, but deep down, I knew the clock was ticking. I couldn't keep living in this cycle of disappointment and broken promises. If nothing changed, I'd have to make a decision, one I wasn't sure I was ready for. But I also knew I couldn't stay stuck like this forever. For now, I'm just waiting to see if Sarah will actually try or if she'll slip back into her old ways. I don't know what's going to happen, but one thing is certain. I won't stick around for another empty promise. Not again. Update 4. So, after that serious conversation, things actually seemed to take a turn for the better, at least for a little while. Sarah made what felt like an honest effort. She planned a small date night at a cozy local restaurant we both liked. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was thoughtful enough to feel like she was trying. For once, she wasn't waiting for me to make all the plans. She also started pitching in around the house without me having to nag her about it. She did the dishes, took out the trash, and even stopped by the grocery store a couple of times to pick up essentials without being asked. It felt like she was finally stepping up in ways she hadn't before. For that first week, I let myself hope. Things seemed lighter, almost like they used to be when we first got together. I even started to believe that maybe she had finally understood how much her inattention had been affecting me. Maybe she was ready to put in the work to rebuild what we were losing. But then, as if on cue, things started slipping back into old patterns. By the second week, the cracks were showing again. She canceled a planned outing, saying that work had piled up and she just couldn't step away. It was the same excuse she always used: work stress. At this point, I couldn't help but feel like it was her safety net, her easy out whenever she didn't want to follow through. I tried to be understanding. I reminded myself how demanding her job could be. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just another excuse. My frustration grew. I had allowed myself to believe that her efforts in the first week actually meant something. But now, it all felt like a temporary fix, like she was just doing the bare minimum to keep me from complaining. The moment that hit me hardest came when Sarah forgot a small milestone. It was the anniversary of the day we first met. I know it wasn't a major event, but it was something that mattered to me. When I casually brought it up, she just shrugged it off like it wasn't a big deal. And in that moment, I realized something devastating. She wasn't even trying to keep track of these things anymore. Those little moments that used to mean so much to us were now completely off her radar. It was just me, holding on to whatever spark was left, while she seemed to have already let it go. I started questioning everything. Did Sarah even care about our marriage anymore? Or was she just assuming I would always be there no matter what? It was becoming harder and harder to ignore how much I was putting into this relationship while she seemed to put in less and less. That realization cut deeper than I thought it would. I started to wonder if she truly valued me or if I was just another part of her life she took for granted. One day, as I was tidying up the living room, I stumbled across something that made my stomach drop. It was Sarah's calendar, tucked behind some papers on her desk. Normally, I wouldn't go through her things, but something compelled me to take a look. And there it was, the date of our anniversary marked on her calendar. She had remembered to write it down, but somehow she still forgot. It was like she had planned for it in theory, but didn't bother to follow through when the time came. I confronted her about it that night. I asked her why she'd marked the date but still managed to forget. Her response? She said she'd forgotten to check her calendar that week. That was her excuse. It wasn't even convincing. To me, it wasn't a simple mistake. It was neglect, plain and simple. What hurt more was what I saw when I looked at the calendar in detail. There were notes about work deadlines, sports events, and weekend trips with friends, all meticulously planned out. But there was almost nothing about us. Our relationship wasn't even a priority. Seeing it all laid out like that hit me harder than I expected. I'd always known her work was a big focus for her, but to see how little space we occupied in her life was like a slap in the face. The final straw came a few days later. I overheard Sarah on the phone with a friend, excitedly discussing a weekend getaway they were planning for a sports event. She was animated, going over every detail like it was the most important thing in the world. It hit me like a ton of bricks. This was a trip she hadn't even mentioned to me. She had time for that, time for her friends, her hobbies, her job, but she couldn't seem to find time for us. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it wasn't worth getting upset over, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt like a betrayal. It wasn't just that she was prioritizing other things. It was that she never even stopped to consider how I might feel about it. She had all this time and energy for everything else, but when it came to our relationship, I was nothing more than an afterthought. So I started to pull back. I stopped making the effort. I stopped texting her throughout the day, stopped trying to make conversation when she got home. I figured if she didn't notice the growing distance between us, then maybe she never would. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling, to understand the loneliness, the frustration. Eventually, our friends started to notice. At first, they sided with Sarah, telling me I was overreacting. But as time went on, some of them began to see the cracks for themselves. A few even reached out to say they understood my frustration. They told me I deserved better. That was when it really hit me. I wasn't the only one who saw what was happening. The tipping point came when Sarah canceled a dinner date we'd planned weeks in advance to go to a last-minute event with her friends. She didn't even tell me in person. She sent me a quick text with a half-hearted apology, saying she couldn't turn down the invitation. And that was it for me. That was the moment I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep waiting around for Sarah to figure things out. The longer I stayed, the more I felt like I was losing myself. I needed to take a stand, whether that meant forcing her to confront the reality of our situation or walking away to give myself the space to heal. Something had to give. I was at a breaking point. It was time to make a decision, one way or another.
Update 5.
After everything that had happened, I knew I needed to step back and reevaluate my priorities. It wasn't just about figuring out if this relationship with Sarah was salvageable. It was about deciding what I truly wanted and deserved in life. The emotional toll of constantly trying to hold things together had left me drained. So, I made the decision to spend the entire weekend alone, without any distractions or interruptions. I ignored Sarah's texts and calls, avoided leaving the house, and just sat with my thoughts. This time, I was determined not to let emotions cloud my judgment. I needed clarity, and the only way to get it was through raw, honest reflection. That weekend turned out to be more eye-opening than I expected. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to confront the hard truths I had been avoiding. I realized that I had been settling for far less than I deserved for years. The relationship had become one-sided, with me constantly giving and Sarah barely making any effort in return. The little things I did, the thoughtful gestures, the compromises, the energy I poured into us, had gone unnoticed for so long that I couldn't even remember the last time I felt genuinely appreciated. And what hurt the most was that Sarah didn't even seem to notice there was a problem. She went about her life as though everything was fine, while I was quietly falling apart. By the end of the weekend, it was clear. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that things were okay when they weren't. The emotional exhaustion was too much to bear, and I knew that staying in the relationship would only lead to more pain. I decided I needed to have one final, honest conversation with Sarah. I had to lay everything out on the table and set firm boundaries for what I needed if we were to have any chance of moving forward. I waited until the following weekend to talk to her. I wanted to give myself time to prepare, to make sure I approached the conversation with a clear head. When the time came, I sat down with Sarah in the living room. She could tell something was off right away, but I don't think she expected what was coming. "I can't keep doing this," I began, my voice steady but firm. "I can't stay in a relationship where I feel unappreciated. I've tried to communicate with you, but nothing ever changes. You're always too busy, and I'm always the one making excuses for you. I can't do it anymore." Sarah looked at me, wide-eyed and visibly shaken. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't realize things were this bad," she said, her voice tinged with shock and confusion. It was as though she had been completely blindsided by what I was saying. And while part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, I couldn't. How could she not have realized how her neglect was affecting me? How could she not see the damage she was doing? Instead of taking responsibility, she shifted the blame back to me. "You should have told me how you were feeling," she said. "I thought everything was fine." That was the moment it hit me just how out of touch she was with the reality of our relationship. "I have tried, Sarah. Over and over again I've tried to communicate, but you never listen," I said, doing my best to keep my voice calm. "You don't take my concerns seriously, and I've been left feeling completely alone. I can't keep living like this." Sarah didn't take it well. She broke down, begging me for another chance. "I'll change, I swear. I'll put in more effort. I'll prioritize you. Please, don't leave me," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, I almost gave in. But then I reminded myself of all the empty promises she had made before. I couldn't let myself fall for words again. "I'm willing to give it one last try," I said finally. "But this time, things have to be different. I need you to actually show me that you can change. No more excuses. No more empty apologies." Sarah nodded, agreeing to everything I said. We talked about specific steps she could take, planning thoughtful dates, making time for us, being more present when we were together. It wasn't a long list, but it was a start. Over the next few days, I began to notice small but significant changes. Sarah planned a couple of dates. Nothing extravagant, but thoughtful nonetheless. She started engaging in conversations instead of scrolling through her phone, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like she was truly trying. Then one evening, she handed me a handwritten letter. In it, she apologized for everything, acknowledged how much I had been carrying in the relationship, and promised to make real, lasting changes. It was the first time she had taken full responsibility for her actions, and it meant more to me than I expected. It felt like a genuine step forward, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down just yet. Words were one thing, consistent actions were another. For now, I'm cautiously optimistic. I've learned not to let my happiness hinge entirely on Sarah or anyone else. If things improve, that's great. If they don't, I'll be ready to walk away. Either way, I know I'm in control of my own happiness, and that knowledge is empowering. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have a real sense of direction. Whatever happens, I'll be okay.